Welcome back to another web development podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. In this episode, we're focused on helping junior developers just learn some good practices for APIs. I've had a lot of questions come my way. I know sometimes there's either too little of information on good practices on learning backend, building good APIs with security, or there's too much. It's overwhelming. Everyone has different opinions. And so I brought someone on to share you even more opinions, but I think you're going to find them very valuable. Rob Dickinson has quite a bit of experience in this area. So, Rob, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. So I'm co-founder and CTO at Resurface Labs, and we're a cybersecurity company that focuses on API security as the real heart of what we're doing. And thanks so much for having me. I love talking about this stuff. It's a great time. It's the best time ever to be in tech. It's a great time to be going into security, but API security is definitely, a subject I'm very passionate about. So always glad to have the chance to spread the good news.
Love it. All right. So, you have quite a bit of experience. So I'm going to challenge you a bit. You mentioned you kind of help some younger people out, and it sounds like you were mentoring them a little bit, but we're going to really go back to the fundamentals. So I think sometimes when people think of an API, a lot of aspiring front-end developers, they'll build what they have to for the front end and realize there are limitations, and there's a lot more they can build, more complexity when you bring in more data. And you mentioned you kind of have experience with some product work. So, typical products are going to have a front end and back end if it's web-based. And so a lot of times when people hear API, they know they have to interact with some API. They send something into a black box and they get something back from a black box. They have no idea what's going on, right? And so can you kind of just go over some, give me a little bit of a picture, what the hell is an API in a way that a lot of junior developers can understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first thing, the first instinct you might have is to go to Wikipedia and see what API stands for. And that doesn't help much. No offense to Wikipedia. How I really think about, API itself is kind of a generic term, unfortunately. There's language level APIs, there's database APIs, there's all these different kinds of concepts where that acronym is used. But really how that's getting expressed moving forward, the kinds of APIs that are really driving businesses now, and the kinds of APIs that people are talking about when they say things like the API economy, are APIs that are being called across a network. So me as a consumer, I'm making a call to Twilio or making a call to SendGrid or making a call to someone else's remote service to do some work for me. And I'm not doing that using a web browser. I'm doing that using a piece of software. And so that software agent that I'm using is making that interaction. And where this kind of fits is that, again, when you think about how these businesses are operating, we've gone from an internet of cat pictures to an internet which is the actual backbone for these digital companies. So we've gone from using phone calls back in the old days to using websites. I'd go to your website, I'd fill out an order form, and that's how I do a transaction, right? I'm using a web browser, I'm using your website, maybe I get an email as a receipt. We moved from that to mobile apps talking to mobile app backends, where really that backend only existed to serve the mobile app, to now companies like Twilio and SendGrid are some of my favorite examples. But GitHub has APIs. Everybody has these APIs now that are available. But what it really comes down to is you get to write the kind of software that you're excited about, and then you get to make remote calls to those other services so that they can do some work on your behalf, and you can leverage what they do. So it's really an amazing time to be able to write software that kind of mixes and matches and mashes up these different services from different providers. And you get to do that with your own locus of control and for your own fan base and customer base. But that's really the kinds of APIs that we're talking about here. So those are going over the network. Those are things like REST APIs, or GraphQL APIs as their basic protocol. Of course, there's lots of other kinds, but those are the ones that we hear about most often.
Yeah. Big fan of GraphQL right now, and that's kind of what I'm exploring with one of my recent apps. But I think like a lot of times when aspiring developers, they learn more about APIs, it's more focused on RESTful. It's more focused on that tradition. Like to me, I've always kind of seen that as like the traditional type of API. But like you said, it kind of does get confusing because when you think of APIs, sometimes tutorials will just kind of mention it's, like a full stack tutorial will have you build out like a really fundamental basic API. And in that API, you're going to have resolvers or like some sort of interaction potentially with the database if you're saving data. A lot of tutorials won't really have you build a lot of microservices or anything like that. So it's like really simple CRUD applications and interacting with the database in a really fundamental way. But like you said, all these different services, they have different APIs you can connect to. And I even recommend like for aspiring front-end developers, you don't have to build a backend. You don't have to build an API. There are so many external APIs you can connect to that have so much data. Like I love what you said. It's like you can build, I think, the software that you love to build or that you want to build, and you can kind of integrate that into someone else's piece of data or whatever they have that you can interact with. So you kind of just integrate those two.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a decomposition of that stack that you see in a lot of coding schools and a lot of introductory literature. Like, I mean, what everyone wants to show at the outset is here's all the different layers, and here's the database, and here's the application layer, and here's the UI on top of that, the standard patterns. And that's all good. Like, that's helpful to know. But what we're talking about here is some of the more modern variations of that I think are tremendously exciting. If you're not really excited about doing UIs and you really are more of a back-end person, great. Go to work for a Twilio or a SendGrid. There is no official client. There is no UI, right? I mean, the focus of what they're doing is processing those transactions that come in over the wire, right? And then to your point, you can go the opposite way too. You can say, if I'm only focused on presentation layer, then great. There's still this amazing variety of backend services out there that I can use and I can mix and match. And so I think that's really fun because to me, that sounds like I get to play in the ecosystem based on where I see my strengths are versus I need to be competent or an expert at all those different layers to actually get something done. As you get older, you realize like nobody masters all those layers. Like maybe you master one, but really nobody does it all. Like you can be middlingly good and get stuff done all the way up the stack, but you're not really going to master the whole thing. So I see it as you really get to focus on the areas of the stack that appeal to you most and really spend your time and energy there.
I like that. And for this episode, I give this scenario with front-end developers that want to connect with external APIs, but I really want to learn more about and just get your perspective on how to go about, like if an aspiring back-end developer or someone that just wants to build out APIs in general for any sort of client, I want to get a feeling for what they should focus on, where they should start, some good practices to start with, right? If you have different recommendations and you want to branch out of like a kind of a RESTful pattern, that's fine. I'm open to recommendations. I find that that's a very common pattern that you're going to see in coding bootcamps, et cetera. But yeah, I guess I'm going to ask pretty specific questions, but if someone did want to, like maybe they went through this tutorial and they built out like a really fundamental API and they're like, this is really cool. I like processing these transactions. I like being the decider of what's going to happen with this data, right? Maybe I'm going to, like, maybe you have ideas come to your head of like how you want to handle like different types of authentication and even potential middleware you want to build, and or you want to do something else where it connects with an integration, some other external service. I feel like it's great to get hungry and curious about that kind of stuff. But if people want to start out with learning APIs and how to build one, can you give any advice on how to go about that?
Yeah, I think the best example or the best advice is get your list of favorites together that you would want to emulate, right? So like a lot of artists, when they're early in their career, they're emulating other artists, they're imitating other artists. And then as they get more confident and they build their own body of work, then they find their own voice. You see that, so much in the music industry, for example. By the time a band gets to their third or fourth major album, they've come into their own sound. Like they're not sounding like anybody else anymore. They're sounding like them, right? So I think, if this is something that you're excited about, jump right in. I mean, think about the kinds of APIs that you'd like to build. If you're going to be on the API provider side of this, think about the kinds of APIs that you'd like to build. Think about who operates in that space or who is similar to that you might want to take inspiration from. Go spelunking through their APIs. Like, look at their API documentation, try it out, see how it works. That's going to give you that immediate tactile sense of what are the things that are like natural and I would do that, versus the things where your inner voice is saying like, well, that seems really hard and that seems really complicated. And why would I do it that way? I think I could do it simpler. But I think if you can, there's so, we're talking about APIs as if this was a new concept, and it is for a lot of people. But the reality is, like, the API economy is already here. I mean, web traffic on the internet now is actually a small percentage of traffic. Most traffic on the internet that isn't streaming traffic or entertainment related is API traffic, right? So the revolution is already here. So whether you're talking about retail, travel, legal, finance, tech, any sector of operations, really, healthcare, aviation, there are APIs available for all those things already. So start with that, right? And get your feet wet. And those are generally well documented, and you can get in very quickly and get a sense of what they're all about. Those folks have put a lot of energy into making it easy to onboard onto their platforms. So they want you learning their APIs, right? There's nothing black hat about this. It's not like you're hacking into somebody else's, which is actually one of the questions that we hear quite a bit from folks who are getting started. Like, well, if I'm just calling someone API, like, isn't that a hack? Like, no. I mean, not if it's a public-facing API that's designed to be called and documented for you. Like, have at it.
Right. No, absolutely. When I started as a developer, there was this, it wasn't super public, but it was all over Twitch forums, and tons of API developers were using it. But there was this one API that gave like chatter information, etc. It was never maintained. It was kind of a broken API. And it was funny to see everyone trying to overcome this brokenness and try to account for it in their application. But it was also fun to try to overcome it and think about, okay, well, what other pieces of data can I pull from this application that's going to at least give me more confidence in this semi-broken data that's coming through? And so you'd have to validate it. But like all these services, they have a lot of different external APIs, and it's fun to play around with it. I don't think your intentions don't have to be malicious, but it's definitely okay to test out the API and try to get certain data back. And like, especially through documentation, they're going to have different authentication rules that you need to follow to be able to get that data back. And I don't know why someone would call that like black hat hacking. That's like what every aspiring developer does, and they just poke at it and see what they can do with it.
I think one of the things that is a little off-putting here that I think people wrestle with is the API stuff is great. Like this level of collaboration and openness is amazing, and it's paying all kinds of benefits, and it doesn't have high capital requirements or high time requirements to get into it, right? But we have actually taken a step backwards in terms of when we were focused on websites and web operations. Those are very tangible and easily accessible. I mean, anyone in your company your grandma can get on a web browser and go to blottyblah.com and look at what's there and have an opinion and fill out an order form and did it work right. But as soon as you say we're going to APIs, those APIs are dark, right? You kind of have to be a developer to understand them. It's very, very difficult if you don't have a development background or a security background. It's very difficult to really have any kind of personal sense of what capability that actually represents, right? And I think just as humans, it's very hard for us to react to things and care about things and understand the risk of things that we fundamentally can't see. And I think that that's kind of a cultural element here that's hard to ignore, that we've lost something going from those web operations that were really designed by humans. Now we've got all these APIs and I can empower all these different kinds of software to use these things on my behalf. But it's much, much more difficult to get a sense of what those are. So the quicker you can get across that boundary, and so specifically, whether you're going into cybersecurity or the development side of this, start using Postman, start using Insomnia, start writing your own scripts that exercise those APIs so that you understand better what the shape of those are. And that stuff shows up on your screen, right? But we just have to recognize that for the folks without those technical skills, it is really difficult to get a sense of what the technical folks are actually talking about and managing, what kind of risk that represents to the business, what the potentials are, in a way that's personal, right? And then, unfortunately, there's always a certain amount of gatekeeping that development imposes, right? Because there is that knowledge barrier. So APIs are absolutely the future, and if you're able to take something like Insomnia and exercise the GitHub API, for example, which is something that you can learn how to do that in a weekend or less. That's really like the kind of direction that you want to go towards. Even if you're not prepared to write those APIs, that's fine. Focus on the consumption side of it, and there are software and tools that like Insomnia and Postman that'll help you with that.
Yeah, that's a really good strategy. So, a couple things. You had mentioned a lot of people kind of see it as this. There's kind of like a curtain, and when you aren't used to interacting with an API, you're not really sure like what it means to connect to that API, to try to grab data, to try to update data. And sometimes that can be a little bit intimidating, especially if you're dealing with an external API. And so I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like a good piece of advice for people that are just like really struggling to understand API stuff, really struggling, and they're kind of fearful of interacting with these other APIs, just build your own. Build like a really minified version of it to understand what the hell is happening with my data. And like, I'm sending a request, but what the hell does that look like to them? Right.
Yeah.
Like get your hands dirty. You kind of suggested that. I feel like you should do that pretty early on. What do you think?
I think the sooner the better. And the thing is, what's really fun about this is that, again, this is not incredibly capital intensive. You don't have to go to school for this. You can grab the low hanging fruit here. You don't have to be an expert coder overnight. There are tons of templates and examples and things that people have blogged about that will help you get started. And the other thing that you can do is, if you go down that road of, let me build just a simple API that tells me what the current time is, right? Or like whatever that is, gives me my favorite Monty Python quote. Whatever that is, go through the learning of that and get the benefits of having learned that. But don't forget the step at the end, which is take that experiment and post it as part of your portfolio. Put it on your GitHub profile, put it on your GitLab profile, right? Or publish a video, a walkthrough through it on you, however is most comfortable for you to do that. but taking that last step of actually using that as a way to build your portfolio and say, this is what I did, so just share it. And now anytime you're able to reference that in the future, folks who, when you're applying to a job or you're looking for a new position, they're going to check out those social media profiles looking for that evidence of your portfolio. Just give it to them. Mm-hmm. Even if it's only a blog post, or even if it's something, I figured out how to install Kubernetes on Mac OS and I struggled to do that, but here's how I did it. Take that, write it up, put it on your GitHub profile, and you'll get SEO traffic to that. You'll get employers looking at that. And you were going to do that work anyway. Just don't forget to share it at the very end.
That's good advice. I mean, I think I think it's a misconception. A lot of aspiring developers, they feel like, and there is this aspect, they feel like they need to prove themselves that they can do professional work, right? But I think also a lot of aspiring developers, they put experienced developers on this pedestal, like they're miles ahead of them and know everything and they've mastered everything. And you, just being a lowly aspiring developer, all you know how to do is like build out a basic API, or you kind of experimented and just set up Kubernetes and you broke everything on your Mac. And like, that's what experienced developers do. Like, we've all been through this process, and then we slowly upgrade and we remember how we did certain things. We remember not to do things this way. Like, I think a lot of people are afraid to put it on social media. These projects, they're like, no one's going to care about these projects. I think that's so far from the truth. And in fact, I've talked to so many hiring managers. They're like, tell me what you're curious about. Like, where did you just like completely get lost? I remember one of my managers saying, I think he put it on his portfolio. He's a CTO, tons of experience. I've interviewed him multiple times on my podcast, and like he manages a team of like around 100 developers or something like that. And he started out with he built a mobile app that was a beer coaster just to see if he could get a mobile app on, I think it was for iPhone. And like, it wasn't rated super high, but he did get a lot of downloads, and he was curious about that. And then he was also curious about building a script for his Xbox, right? And like, a lot of developers this is stuff we love. Like, what the hell got you into coding? What the hell got you into wanting to build this stuff? This is the kind of stuff I want to see what motivates you and what you're curious about. And like, there could be a little project that you decided to go AWOL with, or not AWOL, but like you took it into an entirely different direction. Tell me about that. What'd you learn from it? I think more people need to share that kind of stuff on social media. I think it's so cool. Yeah,
that's one of the things about our community that, I think is fair to critique. That there is that gatekeeping aspect sometimes. And that, I mean, the fear of that is really real, right? The fear of that like, I'm going to be called out as being a hack, or I'm going to be called out as not knowing what I'm doing. And you see, it's like that ongoing joke, but like you see that at places like Stack Overflow, somebody will post a question and you'll have 10 people to show up about how this question is stupid and why don't you already know that, and like all those kinds of things. But and there's always going to be that, I think. But I think the smarter folks, you just kind of get over that. Like, if you're going to be a stand-up comic, you're going to get booed and heckled. If you're going to be a musician, you're going to have people telling you stuff. Like, it's just, you just got to put yourself out there. And the more you do that, the more comfortable with it you'll be. And you'll have those experiences of like, yeah, I posted something and somebody told me I was, a horrible programmer for having that opinion. And life went on because Stack Overflow isn't a real place. The other thing too is, if you're really, really on the ball, you can actually use that to your advantage. So one of the things that I've done, and this is a trick that a lot of people have used, but when I was at Intel, for example, we did this where we basically said, hey, we're going to put out these templates, and they're not going to be the greatest templates ever. And you know what? These smart, cranky people out there, they're going to be crawling all over themselves to come in here and correct us. Because we're Intel and we're putting out something that isn't like as perfectly awesome as it could be, right? And we basically did that, and we thought about kind of some of our community oriented projects, we really thought about driving growth of those projects in that way. Get people, if it's something that gets people stirred up and they want to tell you where you're wrong and how you could do better, let them. And you accept that you get to filter, again, what you choose to listen to and what is actually actionable, right? And you're still going to have there's still going to be people telling you suck, and that's fine. But the more you're going through that process and the more you're comfortable with that process, that's what's going to build your own comfort level. That's what's going to give you that confidence. Because at the end of the day, everyone struggles with this their entire career. I mean, I know people that are, they're in the twilight of their career and they're still waking up and fighting imposter syndrome every day. Like, people are going to realize I don't really know Kubernetes all that well. It's like, dude, you're fine. Like, nobody has 20 years experience in Kubernetes. You're doing fine.
I like that. That's a really useful mindset to have. And I think building that filter is healthy. And I think over time, you'll learn not to attach so much emotion, and you won't let sometimes it's just insecurities and your confidence of what you could do, but you learn to manage that. And I think managing your emotions when you're getting that feedback, because you're going to get all sorts of feedback as a developer, whether you're on Stack Overflow, which is definitely a bit harsher, you be in a community where, quite frankly, they're too nice. They're not giving you the feedback that you need, right? And you're going to be navigating so much feedback. But I do like that strategy of kind of not giving the perfect template and getting people to just really get engaged with the community project. That's fantastic. That's actually a really good strategy. But I want to get your opinion on this. I want you to try to be realistic. Maybe you don't have any data or anything like that, but I just want to poke you with this. For people, because you talk about we've kind of been diving into this curiosity, and if you are kind of curious about diving into someone else's documentation, how they do things. I don't want to do things that way. I'm going to simplify it. And you're reading that and you're thinking, I would do it a different way. To me, that's a really good signal. You're you might be interested in building out your own API, right? Or just doubling down and learning more about this. But a lot of people want a job, and a lot of people are transitioning into tech. Realistically, do you feel like there are a lot of job openings for people that want to dive into building out more APIs or dive into the backend a little bit more? Or do you feel like there are a lot more openings, people should start elsewhere?
It's a really good question. I think it's a great time to be going into whether it's production or consumption of APIs. Especially if you're starting out, because one of the biggest advantages that you have as a younger developer is it's easier for you to enter the market with the more lucrative skills that everyone's looking for, that really not everyone has mastered and can claim a decade of experience. That's kind of why I use the example of Kubernetes, for example. So many folks are moving towards Kubernetes. Very few organizations are actually 100% of the way there. And that is going to take years to unfold still. And when you ask those people, what's holding you back? They say, well, we don't have enough talent. Right. And so I feel like APIs and cybersecurity, it's exactly the same thing. Nobody has 20 years of experience writing GraphQL APIs. It hasn't been around that long. Nobody has 20 years of experience in API security, because that landscape is not that old. So that's what, as a younger person, that's what gives you an edge to get in. And there are real business needs attached to those things. Right? When it comes to hiring SQL Server developers or COBOL developers or, older style technologies, they already have people in place to do that. And that's where you're going to be competing against people that truly have decades more experience than you. And it's going to be really hard to catch up. But the best thing about technology is every new technology generation, there's a reset button. And, now we're going to be hiring for Kubernetes, and nobody has more than 5 years of experience. It levels the playing field out. So the best thing, and the other thing, which I think makes it the best time to be going into tech, is that, you can get a typical Linux laptop, a typical Mac laptop, start with something Unix based and just get to it. I mean, an hour a day, right? Of learning how to do that, the same way that you would learn the piano or learn how to play racquetball or how to coach Little League, which I'm doing right now. Like I haven't played baseball in 20 years, right? But now I'm like helping coach Little League, and so I've got to put all those skills back together. That's what I mean. Like you don't have to say, I'm going to take a year away from my job and I'm going to learn this, or I have to go back to school to do this. The best people in tech are already doing it, and they're finding ways to make more money doing the things that they already love. But if you're naturally curious, you're naturally exercising these things, it's something that you like to tinker with, you like to play with, like you're already on that path. Now you just need to figure out how to get paid for it, for doing it, so that you're spending the bulk of your day doing that thing. Because remember, every day you wait to get into the field, everyone else in the field was learning that day. So get yourself going, get some momentum, build that portfolio, figure out what that first gig looks like, and make that quick transition. But it doesn't have to be, $100,000 in debt or any of these things. I mean, when I was first getting started in technology, like you really had to be you had to have access to a university lab, or you had to have, significant money to have a PC at home. But now, I mean, the equipment is cheap. The tutorials are everywhere. All this information is free. So if you can get that started, if you can start that journey on your own, that to me as a hiring manager, that's my clearest signal, right? With somebody already curious about this and they're following that path. Those are the people that, because that's the journey. That's the whole thing. Whether you're getting paid for it or not, that's what being in tech is all about. It's being naturally curious about these things, wanting to push yourself to learn, and just having fun with that. I mean, if it's fun for you to do that and you enjoy doing that, you're going to be just fine.
So, I have too many bullet points. You bring up a lot of good points, and I kind of want to go off on all these tangents, and I want to ask you questions, but I got to be conscious of our time. So this is interesting. Your mindset, I think your mindset is very encouraging. And I find that a lot of hiring managers do want that curiosity more than most people think. And like you said, it doesn't matter if you've explored it and got paid for it or you've just explored it. They just want that curiosity, and then it's time to figure out how to get paid for it. But I guess I'm gonna toss this your way, because a lot of people will listen to you and it sounds like the positions are very open, but there's still a huge number, majority of people that feel like backend positions focused on API are not junior friendly, that companies don't want to risk a lot of their data and just even being able to interact with that data on juniors, because quite frankly, it takes a while to get really comfortable with security. And you do have to dive a little bit deeper into it. And I think it also helps to have more context of interacting with the users and what kind of data you need to serve to those users or other developers, and discovering more quirks as you work more in your product. And I think there is a benefit that comes from experience dealing with data that's important with customers, or with other developers. And sometimes you just have your personal projects, right, to start with, and you haven't really thought through a lot of the holes that are probably going to be in your APIs because you haven't really tested it. So with that said, most people think that it's not junior friendly to get a backend position first, API position first. What do you think about that?
I'm just laughing because I'm I'm not particularly sure that any aspect of tech is really like junior friendly. Unfortunately, I mean, a lot of those junior positions have gone overseas, and it's something that you have to recognize if you're going to be in this business, that this is a global marketplace that you are competing in, right? And when you're working for a big company, you should have this conversation with yourself. Like, what am I going to do today that justifies me being here when the company could hire 3 people for what they're paying me overseas that, would be my replacements. Like, that is the reality of what we are living in. But there's a brighter side to that, which goes directly with what you said, is that the more you're dealing in trusted data and trusted policies, trusted databases, the more, generally speaking, you're working in security as well. Less of that is really the instinct is for that to go overseas, right? Compare that with QA, for example. Like QA, we maybe could send that overseas, and we'd have more warm bodies on it. And we'd have more, we'd have more tests executed per unit time, and maybe that's a good thing, and that's all there is to it. So I think a lot of businesses are thinking about that. Like, it doesn't matter what size of business you are anymore. Like, you're going to have a global footprint in terms of what you're doing. If you have any level of success, you're going to get to that extremely quickly. Right. And partly because your competitors are willing to do that. And your competitors are willing to think that way. But the good news is that the more you get into that, right, the more you're able to climb the ladder. If climbing that ladder isn't as easy to get into those things, that is actually a benefit to you long term, because those are the jobs that are harder to send overseas. Right, your most trusted senior technical people tend to be in the jurisdiction where the company was founded originally, right? And it's not just American companies, European companies, Asian companies. You see the same thing. Like, the bulk of the company is in Germany, but they do a lot of other things all around the world. But like, engineering and management is in Germany, or engineering and management is in the U.S. So that's, but yeah, it's tough to get to that first gig. One thing that might be helpful in terms of thinking about this, one question I get a lot is, should I do consulting first, or should I go after a paid salary first? Like, which of those is easier to do? Which of those is more profitable to me and on this journey that I'm on? My personal opinion is, I think contractors, like, a lot of people say that's like the cheaper, the safer choice, because like you can just do something for a while, and then if you don't like it, you can move on to something else, or they make some arguments around that. It's kind of like renting a house. Like, you never do as well renting as you would if you bought. The thing, if you're going to be an employee, when you go after that junior employee position versus a contractor position, the companies that you want to work for, they're going to be hiring people first, skills second. So let me have the people who can grow, the people who can learn new things, who are on this journey already. They're going to make better employees. If you're hiring contractors, you're hiring pure skill, and you're expecting to pay top dollar for that, in my experience. So I think you actually have, so if it's a 50-50 either way, I would go employee as the first couple gigs. And it doesn't limit your opportunities at all, in my opinion, to do that, because at the end of the day, all you need is one employer to say yes. And you work there a year, and you got your first gig, and you did this full time, and you've got that experience that you can claim. And that's the hardest stepping stone to get, but you get that knocked out, and you're off. You'll have lots of opportunities from there that you'll be able to build towards.
Okay. It definitely, I definitely hear a lot of experience in your voice, and I think you have a lot of depth of knowledge, especially when it comes to a little bit more senior type positions. And like once you get into security and you're handling some pretty sensitive data, I get the feeling that you want to, like, you're going to close that circle of people that you're going to trust, especially with a little bit more secure stuff that needs a little bit more security. That makes sense. But you also, I think it's, I guess I want to ask you this. If you are that employee, you had brought up the idea, or if you want to aim for that full-time employment, you brought up the idea of like, it's skill second, you know, consultation, or even a contract position, expect to pay higher, so they're paying for skill. But if you want to actually get onto the team, join the company, it's a little bit more of an aim for where can we take this engineer and how can we help them grow and kind of integrate into like where we want to build our products. And so it's skill second. You can come in with like, you know, humble personality, super curious. You mentioned like you love when people are curious about these things. You don't need like the super fancy education or degree to learn this stuff. You just need to be curious. There are tutorials out there. You dig into it. You build that crappy Kubernetes setup locally, right? And you talk about it. What well, what didn't. But technically speaking, like if you felt like someone, because I do feel like your background is definitely like highly in cybersecurity, but I want your opinion on this. For a junior developer to get into a backend or API position that's more junior friendly, that entry level position, what do you think skill wise they need to show? What kind of good practices? What would you recommend for like maybe projects to showcase? Anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely in that case, you don't want to just purely be a developer. You want to be thinking of going in a DevOps role for sure. So
with backend positions, do you feel like absolutely. A lot of with the backend developer position? So there are a lot of backend developers that do not deal with a lot of DevOps stuff. Do you still feel like it's worth aiming towards that direction?
Well, the thing is, you're right. There are folks that choose to specialize, but those, in my opinion, those folks tend not to do as well over the long haul in your career, because it's kind of like if you're only buying stock in one company or two companies, like you will only do as well as that one thing does, right? And so you want to be a little careful about tying yourself too tightly to one style. And the writing is on the wall here that, you know, development as a pure play, like I do nothing but write Python code, or I do nothing but write Java code. That is not worth as much on the open market as someone who can write that code and deploy it to Amazon themselves without having to get an IT person involved. So again, you can always say, and I think it's very authentic to say, my heart really lives here, and I've spent a lot of time and energy honing to where I have expertise in this, and I can almost do that without thinking, right? I mean, I'm so good at that, I can just get in and play. And can you pay your bills that way? Yes, absolutely. But if you want to be in this game for the bulk of your career, that the more you do that, the less comfortable you're going to be, because eventually you're going to be back out on the market again, and what you did is going to be revalued with respect to the current market conditions. Development and operations with DevOps, I mean, that's been merging together for the last 10 years. It's nothing new, and there's nothing about that that's going back the other way. So I would say, you know, if you're almost without exception, like if you're a developer and you do DevOps as well, even if you aren't particularly good at that DevOps part, you are still significantly more valuable than the person who says, no, I'm not really going to go there, right? We all get to choose what we want to invest in. I think that the important bit over the span of your career is that you always do have something that you're learning that you're putting yourself back out there, that you're building those new skills, right? It doesn't matter what direction it is. There's going to be opportunities all around that. The people that wither and die are the people that say, like, C++ is the only language I'm ever going to use, and I'm a master at that, and that's all I'm going to do. They get pigeonholed, ultimately. So I think the generalists, even if you stink at doing some of those general things, like the fact that you're willing to take it on and learn something about it, it makes you, it's such a better position to be able to contribute to those efforts. Like, I might not be an expert on how stuff deploys to a given cloud platform, but I've worked enough with it that I know what it's supposed to look like. And if something breaks, I can describe what's happening to someone that knows it better than me, and they can fix it. That's a very different posture to be able to take than, like, oh, I don't really know anything about that Terraform stuff. Like, I'm not going to get into that.
I definitely have something to say to that. I just noticed, how much more time do you have? Actually, yeah, because we're getting up to about the end of when we scheduled. Do you have like 10 to 15 more minutes?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh,
I think
perfect.
my voice will hold up.
Okay, no, I mean, you're doing great. So basically, in coding boot camps, I got to be careful not to vent. I have so much to say about this, but with coding boot camp, like, first of all, my mindset, coding boot camp, still your best shot at getting a developer role for the price. A lot of self-taught developers, I'd love to see them be successful. I love that resources are pushed. I love that more support is going to it. But quite frankly, a lot of self-taught developers fail. And sometimes it's because, like, a lot of people are just transitioning for the money. They don't get curious. They don't explore. They don't take that initiative to try to set up that environment. Like, they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to learn how to build a backend. Then am I hireable? Well, okay, well, why did you learn how to build the backend? Are you trying to serve up some sort of data to users? Do you like, handling those transactions? Like, tell me what you're curious about, right? And so a lot of people, I think some people just want to transition and better their careers, which is great. But I think you do need to find that enjoyment, that curiosity, that exploration, and that developer that will take that initiative to even learn, like, hey, I kind of recognize this error with Kubernetes. I don't know exactly what's going on, but I can give some sort of context to at least ping DevOps and say, I think this is in your realm, right? Or correct me if I'm wrong, right? That even alone is more than, quite frankly, a lot of aspiring backend junior developers can do, and they're willing to do. And so with coding boot camps, they're spitting out a lot of people. They made a lot of money during the pandemic, opened up tons of remote positions. Like, they're making a lot of profit for it. I am completely open to that, but the quality is lowered. And for full stack programs that claim that you are going to become a software engineer, a hireable software engineer, they'll literally drop the ball. You'll learn how to build a basic API. You'll learn how to interact with the database with some object relational mapper, potentially, or just write some basic SQL. And then you put it on Heroku. Cool. That's not Heroku is a really, really simple solution to set up that pipeline, right? And I think coding boot camps that are spitting out students, where some students have an advantage, they're learning how to put it on Amazon. They're learning how to set it up with Google Cloud Services, or, really dive a little bit deeper and actually build some I think it'd be pretty cool to build some sort of pipeline that at least has, even if you set up Git checks to block certain commits if it doesn't get certain things aren't accepted, or you can even set up something where it's custom, and if your tests fail, it won't push to production, right? It falls back potentially. Like, that kind of stuff, I think that's what employers want to see. And I know coding boot camps, they stop short. And that blend that you're talking about, I think you're really talking about a trend in the industry that explains why so many full stack coding boot camps are not getting developers hired in backend positions. It just falls short. And I do see a blend between DevOps and backend focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been interesting to watch kind of how that code school, code boot camp movement has kind of progressed. And I know a couple of people who've gone through programs like that. And And I think, the advice that I would give around that is what you don't have early on in your career is evidence that you can do the job that you want. That's what you're bumping up against, right? And there are people who are, hiring managers who are telling you that you don't have it. So there's that external way, but also like internally, like you don't have the confidence yet that you can do it. You don't, right? A big part of it is just saying, screw it, man. Yeah, I can do that. That's all it is. I can do that. Right. And so I think, like, whether it's a coding boot camp or whether it's a cybersecurity program or, somebody getting their master's in cybersecurity or anything like that, or somebody who's thinking about, on the DevOps side, somebody who's thinking about like getting a certification, like getting their Amazon certification, getting their Azure certification, like it's all about what you think you're going to get out of that. Like, those are great ways of demonstrating your enthusiasm and your curiosity, right? Those are very tangible, measurable things. I got a certificate in cybersecurity as part of the journey that I'm on, and I can hold that up and show that, right? So, and I kind of think about the coding schools as the same way. Like, if you've been developing stuff, if you've been self-taught and you've hit the limits of what you can do, and you want to try to get to the next level, and you also want the reinforcement and the confidence of saying, like, wow, even in this field of people that are thinking like me, like, I can actually do this. Like, that's tremendously helpful to like get you that certification, like get you that experience, right? But I think the idea that you're going to take someone who's never coded before, and 6 months later, or 6 weeks later, or whatever, that they're a software engineer, not really. I mean, you wouldn't expect that in music or the arts, for example. You wouldn't say, somebody who's never played the piano before, you're going to come to my piano boot camp, and 6 weeks later, you're going to be a concert pianist, and you're going to be opening for Taylor Swift. Like, that's probably not going to be happening, right? But if you've been on that journey the whole time, and you're trying to get to that next quantum level, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great way to demonstrate your curiosity. It's a great way to get that experience. It's a great way to build your portfolio. It's a great way to network with other people who are on that same journey. That part, I think, is all good. But, but the idea that, you're just going to do, you couldn't learn Spanish in 6 weeks. Most of us, you couldn't learn Russian in 6 weeks. Are you really going to learn to speak computer in 6 weeks? Probably not. But it can be a really good thing to do, and it can really help you to get to that next level, right? Never forget, there's a lot of people that might be at the same level as you, but they don't actually do the thing, right? Like, you go to a code school, you get your certification, you go through a master's program, whatever that looks like, right? You're going to be one step ahead of the person that said, yeah, I'd really love to get into cybersecurity. And then you ask them, well, is it something you're reading about? No, not really. Well, then you're not really that interested in it.
Yeah.
And again, that's where it's really going to show up. And I think that's part of where, again, it's all about what you're trying to get out of it. If you're going through a code school so you can become a contractor and compete based on your skills, I think that's an uphill battle. But if you want to show that as part of the transformation that you're making, I mean, as a hiring manager myself, I love people who are going from one thing to the next thing, and they have a sense of what that is and what it's going to mean for them, and they don't even know what it translates to in the future yet, but they're super excited to see where this part goes. I mean, those are the people that come to the top of my list, every single time.
I like that. So I think, yeah, you're really honing in on being careful to think, like, even any certification, any coding boot camp is going to get you from A to Z, and boom, you're in the industry. And that's just not realistic. And I think it's important to recognize, like, the people that are successful and get jobs with coding boot camps, they're usually front loading a lot of information. Then the coding boot camp starts them at a higher level, or boot camp is like really fundamental. They graduate And then they're spending the next 3 to 6 months like building out projects, diving in deeper. And like if it's a full stack program, like you recommend, I think it's amazing advice. Experiment with DevOps a little bit. Get your hands dirty with AWS, right? I think blending, again, DevOps with backend, if you're aiming for that API or backend position, I think it's super, I think those are the types of people. And when they continue to show that they have curiosity to get a little bit more general knowledge, they might have their focus, but a little bit more general knowledge that's going to, quite frankly, they're going to be more valuable to solve business needs, where like maybe that company, like if they can hire developers that are super curious, they're going to figure out the DevOps, they don't necessarily need to hire people in IT or like specifically DevOps. Their backend developers can take ownership of it. But I think kind of like what you're alluding to is like, I think backend developers, API developers. So front end, it's a little bit different, and it's a different trajectory. You don't need to learn DevOps stuff at all. It's a completely different trajectory. But backend, like I think that's what's needed. That's what companies want. And they want that backend developer that's curious, has a little bit more general knowledge, because all the backend developers that I knew, they did start exploring that more, and they were super knowledgeable about like all the AWS errors that like I had to deal with as a front end developer being on call. And I would, I learned as much as I can, but backend developers, I think it's more on them to figure that kind of stuff out, and it's expected of them. It pays well when backend developers are curious about that stuff and dive deeper into it. But yeah, I think that was just a really good thing to emphasize, because that's a pattern I see happening. And I mentioned coding bootcamps because that's what my channel's about. I review tons of programs, so I think people are thinking about that. But maybe my advice for that is like, if you're going to a full stack program, like if they're just setting you up with something like Heroku, I don't think that's enough. And I think I would expect to get a little bit more curious and get your hands dirty with something a little bit more complex like AWS. I'm just thinking through some of the stuff as you're saying it. With that said, we're just at the end. Is there anything, like you can respond to what I just said, but is there anything else you want to share for like advice that are for aspiring developers that are like backend developers, they want to get into API stuff? Because I think you've been encouraging, but I feel like a lot of people don't feel like that's in their path in the future. Even if they spent like a whole 2 years diving into backend API stuff, DevOps stuff, there's a big consensus that no, junior developers are not allowed here. So like, do you have any advice for people that are like, this kind of stuff is exciting, I don't want to go to front end, I don't want to have to deal with JavaScript, I don't want to have to deal with CSS, right? Is there any advice for people that do enjoy the backend stuff where they can actually land that position?
Yeah, absolutely. Just go after it. My dad is an old school power engineer, and when I was first getting started in my career, he gave me this advice, which is basically something like, think of something that you can do in 15 minutes. That moves you 15 minutes closer to the project you're trying to build, or the whatever it is that you're trying to learn, or like say to yourself, like, what can I do in 15 minutes, or what can I do in 30 minutes, or what can I do in an hour? And if I can't get it done in an hour, who can I ask to give me the answer about why I'm not getting there as quick as I should be, right? And so if you're naturally curious and naturally excited about going in this direction, there are lots of steps that you can take to do that. But I think the trick is getting out of that mode where it feels like it's overwhelming or something larger than, like, that is your emotional reaction to the scenario, and that's real, but it's not. But don't be driven based on that, right? Like, here's an example of that. You might hear from someone that they are a friend of mine. He wants to get his cloud certification, his cloud DevOps certification. And he's like, once I have this certification, then I'll be able to start interviewing for DevOps positions. And I'm like, no, stop. the fact that you're going after that certification right now is good enough. Like, why would you wait 2 more months to like get that certification? Like, go and interview now and say that you're getting that, and you'll have it in 2 months. Like that. Is it better to already have the certification? Absolutely, but don't wait. It's worse. It's actually worse to even wait. So the more you can get on that, and the more you can think about just like, I'm only going to be able to spend 30 minutes on this today. I'm a CTO. I have kids at home. I've got so much other stuff on my plate, like around running the business and all this stuff. And so I'm literally still doing this. Like when I sit down at night and and I may have an hour of uninterrupted time, and I'm like, okay, what magic can I do in the next hour that like gets me closer to what I want to do? And, and if I can't, then I'll back off and I'll do something else, or that's where I'll start searching on Google and I'll start looking for the answer, or that's where I'll start going through my network. I think the more you can actively break that down into very manageable pieces, the more it kind of diffuses the fear around that. And also, you accomplish something small, it gives you that confidence to want to accomplish the next thing. And you need that. It's all about your confidence, your imposter syndrome, your fear of gatekeeping by the more senior folks. Like, that is ultimately what deters a lot of people from working in this industry. And I think the industry, there's things we could be doing in the industry to make the industry more welcoming. And I think part of that is just acknowledging that for most of us in this field, it's a journey of a whole lot of little steps and little things we were able to do and tick off. Nobody's born knowing how to do all this stuff. And even if you were, the tech's going to be different in 5 years, and we're hitting the reset button anyway. And if you're just in it for the paycheck, and you're not naturally curious, and you're not naturally having fun, there's even a place for you, as it turns out, in this whole thing, because there's a lot of folks who realize, like, I may not really love software development, but solution engineering or technical sales or technical support or product management or project, like, there's all these other ways to be involved in technology where you can use what you've learned already. So, like, I don't really believe that anything you pick up along the way is ever wasted in this field, right? And can you go into technical sales and compete against the people that never coded a day in their life? Yes, it's an advantage. You can suck at being a coder, but it still gives you an advantage in some of these auxiliary functions. So again, that's kind of like that gatekeeping aspect, right? Like unless you're writing code in C++ and you think in terms of STL templates, like, you're not a real developer, you're not really in tech. There are lots of ways to be in tech, and don't be afraid to explore that. And stay loose, stay limber. Don't get too discouraged. And over time, you'll find out the things you're naturally comfortable with, and then as you get a sense of that, and you know what you're excited about more, then the easier you can skate to where the puck is going to be. And the more you can do that, the more you'll be worth on the open market as well. If you're in this field for long enough, you're going to have a lot of gigs. So the onus is on you to kind of figure out what your trajectory is, what your path, what you want your path to look like. And you have a lot of fun, a lot of control in that process. It's just hard to get going, and everybody knows that. It's universally hard to get going, but that's okay. And believe it or not, there will be people in your network that will sign up to help you, with that all day long.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, that's really good advice to end with. I like it. I appreciate that. I think curiosity is very interesting. And I do think sometimes people get tunnel vision, especially when they want to transition into tech. And there's nothing wrong with transitioning for money, but I don't think software engineering is something everyone is going to enjoy or even make the most amount of money in, depending on like what they really want to dive heavily into in tech. Like there are a lot of other positions you can be happy that give you a work-life balance, good medical benefits. They give you purpose, or you can specialize more. You can make more money depending on like which profession you're going into. I love like you've really beaten down this idea of like curiosity. What do you like? Find some enjoyment with it, explore, learn something new. It'll all carry over into eventually, you know, what your career is going to look like in tech. And I think that's fantastic advice. Okay. So with all of that said, I definitely enjoyed this conversation. Rob, if people want to reach out to you and anything else you want to shout out, where could they reach you?
Yeah, I'm easy to find online. You can reach me on Twitter. My handle is @RobFromBoulder. Also available on LinkedIn. You can reach me by email at rob@resurface.io. And really encourage that. I mean, if you're curious about how to get started, if you don't feel like you have enough support, in getting that first position or getting going in this field, please reach out. I know people that want to mentor, and it's hard to find those folks, and it's such a meaningful experience to go through to help someone get started. So anything that I can do to help somebody on that. I mean, I was there too. We all were. But it's really it's a great time to be in this field. Not just to have more control over your financial destiny, but in terms of living where you want to live and doing the kind of work that you want to do. And, there's so much empowerment around this right now. I mean, it's easy to recommend, going into this field. And I do feel like there is a legit pot of gold at the end of the rainbow there, for the people that are willing to go there. It's just hard to get started.
Yeah, it is. I think a lot of people, I mean, that's showing empathy. It truly is. It's hard to get started for a lot of people. But there are a lot of people that we all had those feelings. We all had those insecurities and imposter syndrome, and we made it into tech just like anyone else can. So, fantastic advice. That's it. Rob, stick around for a couple of minutes, but thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks again for having me.
Everything.